My sister shamed me in front of everyone as a pathetic leech, but the truth I carried would teach her a lesson no stage could ever hide. I used to believe that family meant everything, that blood was thicker than water, and that parents would sacrifice anything for their children's future. I held on to that belief right up until the moment I discovered my own family had been systematically destroying mine. My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 19 years old. I'm a freshman at State University studying law, though honestly, I never thought I'd make it this far. Not because I wasn't smart enough, but because my family always made it clear that higher education was a luxury we couldn't afford. That's why, from the time I was 12, I started building my college fund penny by penny. Looking back, I realize how obsessive I was about that savings account. Every single birthday gift from distant relatives, every crisp $20 bill tucked inside Christmas cards from my grandparents, every crumpled I earned watching the Morrison kids down the street. Everything found its way into that account like some kind of sacred ritual. During summers I'd work double shifts at Scoop's ice cream parlor, my hands permanently sticky from chocolate sauce and my feet aching from standing on concrete floors for 8 hours straight. The other kids my age were spending their paychecks on clothes, movies, or hanging out at the mall, not me. I'd march straight to the bank every Friday afternoon, clutching my paycheck like it was made of gold. When I turned 14, my parents helped me open the formal savings account, replacing the piggy bank that had served me since childhood. I remember how proud they seemed that day, how Dad kept telling the bank teller about his financially responsible daughter. For years after that, he'd brag to his coworkers and friends whenever the topic of teenagers came up. "Emily's going to go places," he'd say with this satisfied smile. "She's got her head on straight, not like most kids these days who just waste their money on nonsense." That validation meant everything to me. I was proud of that account in a way that probably wasn't entirely healthy for a teenager. While my classmates were worried about prom dresses and weekend plans, I was tracking compound interest rates and researching the best educational savings strategies. By my senior year of high school, I had managed to save $45,000, a number that still makes me proud when I think about the discipline it required. Sure, it wasn't enough to cover 4 years at a decent university completely, but combined with the academic scholarships I'd worked so hard to earn, it would get me through without drowning in the kind of student loan debt that destroys people's financial futures. I had spreadsheets that would make a financial planner jealous, payment plans color-coded by semester, budgets mapped out to the penny for everything from textbooks to laundry detergent. I knew exactly how much I needed for tuition, books, room and board, and even had a small emergency fund built in for unexpected expenses. I had it all figured out, or at least I thought I did. My older sister Jessica was different. 26 years old and still figuring things out, she'd bounced between jobs as a freelance stylist, never quite finding her footing. She was the artistic one, the free spirit, the one who could make our parents laugh until they cried with her stories and impressions. I was the practical one, the planner, the one who had her life mapped out in 5-year increments. Growing up, our parents George and Linda Carter had drilled their financial reality into us with the consistency of a broken record. Dad worked long hours as an accountant for Henderson and Associates, a modest firm that handled taxes for local small businesses and middle-class families. The work was steady but unremarkable, the kind of job that paid the bills without leaving much room for luxury. Mom had given up her part-time receptionist position when Jessica was born 26 years ago and never returned to the workforce, claiming someone needed to be home for the children. They lived comfortably enough in our 3-bedroom ranch house with its aging appliances and hand-me-down furniture, but they made sure we understood the boundaries of their generosity. "We can't help you kids with college," became their standard response whenever the topic of higher education came up at family dinners or during visits with relatives whose children were college-bound. "You'll have to figure it out on your own, just like we did." Dad would say this with a tone that suggested we should be grateful for the lesson in self-reliance, as if financial abandonment was some kind of character-building gift. Mom would nod along, adding things like, "It'll make you appreciate your education more," or "Young people today expect everything handed to them," which is exactly what I did, figured it out on my own, because I had no other choice. So when the first crack appeared in their carefully constructed narrative of financial limitation, it hit me like a physical blow. I was home for spring break during my freshman year, sitting in the kitchen catching up on homework, when I heard the unmistakable sound of a car door slamming in our driveway. Through the window, I watched Jessica climb out of what was unmistakably a brand new Honda Civic. Not a few years old, not certified pre-owned, not leased with a modest down payment, but genuinely, factory fresh new. The metallic silver paint gleamed like it had never seen rain. And when she clicked the key fob, the car chirped with that crisp electronic sound that only comes from vehicles straight off the lot. She was practically vibrating with excitement as she bounded toward the house, her face lit up like she'd won the lottery. Within minutes, she was dragging all of us outside for the grand tour, running her hands over the dashboard like she was caressing precious metal while enthusiastically demonstrating the heated seats and backup camera. "How did you afford this?" I asked, genuinely curious. Her styling work was sporadic at best, and I knew she'd been struggling to make rent on her tiny apartment. "Oh, I've been saving up," she said with a wave of her hand. Plus, Mom and Dad helped out a little. I felt a strange twist in my stomach. Our parents, who had always claimed they couldn't help with major expenses, had somehow found money to help Jessica buy a car. But I pushed the feeling down. Maybe they'd come into some unexpected money. Maybe Dad had gotten a raise. I didn't want to be the jealous little sister. 2 weeks later, Jessica called with even bigger news. She'd put an offer on a house. Not a tiny starter home or a fixer-upper, but a beautiful 3-bedroom colonial in the nicer part of town. The asking price was $250,000. "I'm so excited!" She gushed over the phone. "It has a huge kitchen and a backyard perfect for entertaining. Mom and Dad are so proud. Dad says it's a great investment, and Mom's already planning how to decorate the guest room." I hung up the phone feeling nauseous. Something was very, very wrong. Jessica had never mentioned having that kind of money, and even with a generous down payment gift from our parents, the monthly mortgage would be more than her entire income most months. The numbers didn't add up, and numbers were something I'd always been good at. That weekend, I decided to check my college fund balance. I hadn't looked at it since January, figuring it was better to let it sit untouched until I needed to make my sophomore year tuition payment. I logged into the online banking portal, clicked on my savings account, and stared at the screen in disbelief. The balance read $1,247.33. I refreshed the page, thinking it was a mistake. Same number. I called the bank's customer service line, heart pounding as I waited on hold. Maybe there had been a computer error. Maybe the website was showing wrong information. "I'm showing several large withdrawals from your account," the customer service representative told me after verifying my identity. The largest was on February 15th for $30,000 to $8,000. And another on March 2nd for $5,000. Both were authorized by the account holders. Account holders, plural. My parents were still listed as joint holders from when I was a minor. My hands were shaking as I requested the detailed transaction history. Every withdrawal had been authorized by George Carter, my father. The money had been transferred to his personal checking account, and from there the trail led exactly where I suspected it would. I drove home in a haze, my mind reeling. $43,000. Gone. Money I had saved for 7 years, money that represented countless hours of work, countless sacrifices, money that was supposed to secure my future. I found my parents in the living room, watching television like nothing had happened, like they hadn't just stolen my entire future. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Dad muted the TV and turned to look at me. "What's wrong, sweetheart? You look upset. Where is my college fund money?" The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my mother's face go pale, watched my father's jaw clench. They knew. They'd been waiting for this conversation. "Now, Emily," Mom started, using the same tone she'd used when I was 5 and had broken something valuable. "You need to understand that family comes first. Jessica needed help, and we all need to make sacrifices for each other." "Sacrifices?" I could barely get the word out. "You stole my money. Money I earned. Money I saved for 7 years. "We didn't steal anything," Dad said firmly. "That money was in a joint account. Legally, we had every right to access it, and we used it to help your sister get established. She's buying a house, Emily. That's a real investment in her future. What about my future?" I stood up, my voice rising. "That money was for my education. You know I need it for school. You know I've been planning this since I was 12 years old." "You'll figure it out," Mom said dismissively. "You're smart. You'll get more scholarships, maybe take out some student loans. People do it all the time. Jessica needed the help more than you do, Dad added. She's older, she's ready to settle down and start a family. Your education can wait a year or two if necessary. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My own parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, support me, help me succeed, had casually decided that my dreams were less important than my sister's house. I want the money back, I said quietly. All of it. With interest. Dad actually laughed. Don't be ridiculous, Emily. The money's already been spent. Jessica's closing on the house next week. Even if we wanted to give it back, which we don't, it's impossible now. Then I'll sue you, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. I'll take you to court and get my money back legally. This made both my parents laugh harder. Sue us? Mom wiped tears from her eyes. Honey, you don't have money for a lawyer, and no lawyer would take a case like this anyway. We're your parents. We were acting in the family's best interests. You really think you can win against us in court? Dad shook his head. You're 19 years old with no money and no connections. We've been in this community for 30 years. Everyone knows us, respects us. Who do you think they're going to believe? I left the house that night knowing I was completely alone. My parents had made their choice, and it wasn't me. Jessica had called later, not to apologize, but to lecture me about being selfish and ungrateful for everything our parents had done for me over the years. You're being dramatic, she said. It's not like you're never going to college. You'll just have to work a little harder for it, like most people do. At least now I can provide a stable home when I start my family. Think about your future nieces and nephews, Emily. Don't you want them to have a nice house to grow up in? I hung up on her. For 3 days I barely ate or slept. I researched student loan options, looked into transferring to cheaper schools, calculated and recalculated budgets that didn't work no matter how I adjusted them. Without that money, I'd have to drop out. There was no way around it. But then I remembered Professor Hayes. William Hayes had been my high school government teacher and debate coach. He was the one who'd encouraged me to study law in the first place, who'd helped me craft my college application essays, who'd written recommendation letters that helped me get into state university. What I'd never told my parents was that Professor Hayes wasn't just a teacher. He was a retired civil rights attorney who'd spent 30 years fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. I'd kept in touch with him throughout my freshman year, sending occasional emails about my classes and thanking him for his mentorship. He'd always told me to reach out if I ever needed anything. I never imagined I'd need to take him up on that offer. I called him on a Thursday evening, and when I explained what had happened, the silence on the other end of the line lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Emily, he finally said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Are you telling me that your parents withdrew money from an education fund without your consent to purchase real estate for your sister? Yes, sir. $43,000. Everything I'd saved since I was 12. And they're refusing to return it? They say it's impossible because the money's already been spent, and besides they claim they had the legal right to take it since they were joint account holders. Professor Hayes was quiet again. Then, Emily, do you have copies of any documentation about this account? Bank statements? Anything showing the money was designated for educational purposes? I did. I'd kept meticulous records of every deposit, every statement, every conversation with the bank about college savings plans, and tax advantages for education funds. Bring everything to my office tomorrow, he said. And Emily? Your parents are wrong about more than just the moral implications of what they've done. They may have made a very costly legal mistake. The next day, I spread everything out on Professor Hayes' desk. Bank statements, deposit slips, copies of scholarship applications, where I'd listed my college savings as part of my financial planning, even emails I'd sent to my parents over the years updating them on my college fund progress. Professor Hayes reviewed everything methodically, occasionally asking questions or making notes. After an hour, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me seriously. Emily, based on what you've shown me, I believe your parents have committed a form of financial abuse. More specifically, they've misappropriated funds from what was clearly established as an educational trust, even if it wasn't formally structured as one. He explained that because I'd been contributing my own earned money to the account since I was 14, and because there was clear documentation that the money was intended solely for educational purposes, I had a strong case for conversion. Essentially, theft. The fact that they were joint account holders doesn't give them the right to use the money for purposes other than what was intended, he said. It's similar to someone having access to a business account but using the money for personal expenses. The access doesn't equal the right to misuse the funds. Professor Hayes agreed to represent me pro bono, but he warned me that taking legal action against my parents would likely destroy our relationship permanently. "Are you prepared for that?" he asked. "Because once we file this lawsuit, there's no going back. Your family will see this as the ultimate betrayal." I thought about my parents laughing at me, dismissing my dreams as less important than Jessica's house. I thought about 7 years of sacrifice being erased in 2 bank transactions. I thought about having to drop out of school and abandon everything I'd worked for. "They betrayed me first," I said. Professor Hayes filed the lawsuit the following Monday. By Wednesday, it was front-page news in our local paper. The headline read, "Local Parents Accused of Misappropriating Daughter's College Fund." The article was devastating. It outlined the case in detail, including quotes from Professor Hayes about the importance of protecting educational funds and the legal obligations of parents who manage their children's savings. But it was the follow-up coverage that really changed everything. By Friday, the story had been picked up by regional news stations. By the following week, national education advocacy groups were citing my case as an example of why stronger legal protections were needed for student savings accounts. Professor Hayes had connections in legal and academic circles that I never could have imagined. Law professors from 3 major universities submitted friend-of-the-court briefs supporting my case. A nonprofit organization that fought financial abuse offered additional legal support. Suddenly, what my parents had seen as a small family dispute had become a very public legal battle with national implications. The attention was overwhelming, but it also brought unexpected allies. Other students reached out to share similar stories. Legal experts offered commentary supporting my position. Education advocates praised my courage in standing up for students' rights. My parents, meanwhile, were falling apart. Dad's employer, a conservative accounting firm that prided itself on ethical financial practices, suspended him pending the outcome of the case. The local newspaper ran a follow-up story about the professional implications of the lawsuit, noting that someone who managed other people's money for a living was being accused of misappropriating funds from his own daughter. Mom, who had been active in several community organizations, found herself quietly asked to step back from her volunteer positions. The church where she'd sung in the choir for 15 years suggested she take a temporary break while the legal issues were resolved. Jessica's mortgage application was suddenly under review. The bank had noticed the connection to the lawsuit and wanted to investigate the source of her down payment before finalizing the loan. 2 weeks after the story broke, my parents' attorney called Professor Hayes with a settlement offer. They wanted to meet. The meeting took place in Professor Hayes' law office on a gray Tuesday morning. My parents looked like they'd aged 5 years and 5 weeks. Dad's usually perfect hair was disheveled, and Mom couldn't make eye contact with me. Their lawyer, a nervous man in an ill-fitting suit, spread papers across the conference table. "My clients are prepared to offer full restitution," he said quickly. $43,000 plus interest and reasonable legal fees. In exchange, the lawsuit would be dismissed and all parties would sign a non-disclosure agreement. Professor Hayes looked at me. We'd discussed this possibility and I'd already made my decision. "The money, yes," I said. "The NDA, no." Dad looked up sharply. "Emily, be reasonable. This has gone far enough. We're offering you everything you asked for." "You're offering me what you stole from me in the first place," I corrected. "And I won't sign an agreement that prevents me from talking about what happened. Other students need to know they have rights. Other parents need to understand that there are consequences for this kind of behavior." The negotiations continued for 3 hours. In the end, we reached an agreement that gave me everything I wanted. Full restitution of $43,000 plus $7,200 in interest and accrued penalties, $15,000 in legal fees, and no restrictions on my ability to discuss the case publicly. But the real victory came from the consequences my family faced for their actions. Dad was fired from his job 2 weeks later. The story had damaged the firm's reputation, and they couldn't afford to keep an employee who'd been publicly accused of financial misconduct, even if the case had been settled. At 52, he struggled to find another position in accounting. The legal settlement had wiped out most of their savings, and without his income, my parents were forced to sell their house and downsize to a small apartment. Mom's social standing in the community never recovered. The story had been too public, too scandalous. Even after the settlement, people remembered. She became withdrawn, rarely leaving the apartment except for necessities. Jessica's situation was perhaps the most dramatic. The mortgage company ultimately rejected her loan application due to the irregular source of her down payment. She lost her deposit and had to move back in with our parents, into their tiny 2-bedroom apartment. The stress of the situation, combined with the public embarrassment, led to a breakdown in her relationship with her longtime boyfriend. Her styling business also suffered as clients, uncomfortable with the controversy, quietly took their business elsewhere. But the consequences weren't just punitive, they were educational. The case had brought attention to a gap in legal protections for student savings, and within 6 months, our state had passed legislation requiring additional safeguards for educational funds managed by parents on behalf of minor children. Professor Hayes helped me establish a proper educational trust for the returned money, ensuring that no one could access it without my explicit consent. The legal fees were covered by a fund that had been established by education advocates who wanted to support students in similar situations. As for me, the settlement money, combined with the publicity from the case, opened doors I never could have imagined. I received scholarship offers from several prestigious law schools, including a full ride to Professor Hayes's alma mater. I was invited to speak at conferences about student rights and financial protection. I even received a summer internship offer from a firm that specialized in financial fraud cases. The transformation wasn't just financial, it was personal. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to have people truly advocate for me, to have support systems that weren't conditional on my compliance or gratitude. Professor Hayes and his wife Margaret became like surrogate grandparents, inviting me for holidays and family dinners. They celebrated my successes and supported me through the emotional aftermath of losing my biological family. Through them, I met other students, faculty members, and legal professionals who became genuine mentors and friends. 6 months after the settlement, my parents reached out through their lawyer, asking if I'd be willing to meet for coffee and discuss rebuilding our relationship. I declined. They'd had 19 years to build a relationship based on respect and support, and they'd chosen instead to view me as a resource to be managed, rather than a person to be cherished. I did, however, agree to accept a written apology, which arrived 2 weeks later. It was a formal, legal document that acknowledged their wrongdoing and expressed regret for the harm they'd caused. It felt hollow and calculated, like everything else they'd done, but it provided a sense of closure. Jessica never apologized. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances, she still blamed me for destroying the family and being selfish. She moved to another state about a year later, supposedly for a fresh start, though I suspected it was really to escape the lingering reputation damage from the case. The hardest part wasn't losing them. It was realizing I'd never really had them in the first place. The parents I'd thought I knew, who'd praised my responsibility and planning, had been performative. They'd supported my college savings as long as it didn't conflict with their other priorities. But the moment Jessica needed something, my 7 years of sacrifice became expendable. But I learned something valuable from that betrayal. Family isn't about blood or obligation or shared DNA. It's about who shows up when you need them most. Who fights for you when you can't fight for yourself. Who celebrates your successes without resentment or conditions. Professor Hayes showed up. Margaret showed up. The legal community that supported my case showed up. The students who shared their stories and offered encouragement showed up. They became my real family, the one I chose and who chose me back. Today, I'm a senior at law school, graduating summa cum laude with a concentration in family law and financial advocacy. I've been accepted to clerk for a federal judge who specializes in financial crimes, and I've already been offered positions at 2 firms that focus on protecting individuals from financial abuse. I've also started a nonprofit organization that provides legal support to students whose educational funds have been misappropriated by parents or guardians. We've helped recover over $2 million for students across the country, and we've successfully lobbied for stronger legal protections in 12 states. The irony isn't lost on me that my parents' betrayal led me to my true calling. I became passionate about financial advocacy law because I lived through financial abuse. I learned to fight for others because I had to learn to fight for myself. Their attempt to limit my future ended up expanding it in ways I never could have planned. Sometimes people ask if I ever regret pursuing the lawsuit, if I wish I'd found a way to work things out with my family. The answer is always no. You can't negotiate with people who don't respect your fundamental worth and dignity. You can't maintain relationships with people who see your dreams as less important than their convenience. I don't hate my parents or Jessica. Hate requires too much energy, and I have better things to do with mine. But I also don't miss them. I don't wonder what family gatherings would be like or wish things had been different. I learned that some relationships are worth fighting for, and others are worth fighting against. The family I have now is small but genuine. Professor Hayes walked me down the aisle when I married my law school sweetheart last year. Margaret helped me choose my wedding dress and cried harder than anyone when I graduated. My chosen family celebrates my achievements without taking credit for them and supports my goals without trying to redirect them toward their own priorities. I still keep the newspaper clipping from the original story about my case, not because I'm proud of the conflict, but because it reminds me of an important truth. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. And when that happens, you have two choices. You can accept their limitations and sacrifice your own potential, or you can find the courage to protect yourself. I chose courage, and it changed everything. Now, when I help other students who've been financially betrayed by their families, I tell them what Professor Hayes told me: you deserve advocates, not obstacles. And if the people who are supposed to be your advocates have become your obstacles, it's time to find new people. I found my people, and they found me. We built something real together, not based on blood or obligation, but on mutual respect, genuine care, and shared values. That's what family actually means, and it's worth more than any amount of money my parents could have stolen or returned. The girl who used to plan every detail of her life down to the penny learned that the best things in life can't be planned. They can only be recognized and embraced when they appear. My real family appeared when I needed them most, and for that I'll always be grateful. Even to my parents, in a strange way. Because their betrayal led me to everything I was actually meant to find,